So I thought I would just spend this discussion with all of you, and then in honor, obviously, of your close colleague and former colleague here at the school, hopefully providing some excitement, some enthusiasm, maybe presenting some new ideas for all of you to consider, and really thinking about, what do careers in this space look like around sustainability, and how does a company like Microsoft think about the sustainability challenge, a planet-sized problem, and what's our role to play in that mix, and then hopefully what's all of your roles in that space as well. So first and foremost, a little bit of the sobering truth that we all know, and so I'll hit it fast and then quickly move on. But the thing that really grounds a lot of the work you're going to hear us talk about throughout the year, and as many companies talk about, and you probably heard about in the corporate panel, is that last year in 2023, there was a global stock take that was taken by all the UN countries, and it found that the world is not on track to the Paris commitments. I had the honor of being there, serving as John Kerry's special advisor on climate during the Paris Agreement, and it was an incredible moment, an incredible process, a painstaking process to get to that agreement in 2015, and it was a watershed moment. If you look at climate policy pre-2015 and post, you actually see the kind of escalation you want to see in climate policies happening, and you look at the market, and the market did move after 2015 into climate tech, and part of the reason why many of you joined this school is to think about careers in climate, and so it was a watershed moment. But the sobering truth that came up at the end of last year was that the world's just not on track to the targets they set in 2023, and that window for closing is quickly moving fast. But, and I said I'd hop to it fast, not all the news is dire. And the reason why the news is not dire is because of these stats. So when I look at where we are and where we've come, there are a couple areas that anchor us in terms of process and optimism that could actually help us think through what does it mean and how do we get on track and what does on track look like. So for 4 years ago, Microsoft set our commitments, as Peggy mentioned, in 2020 to be carbon negative, water positive, zero waste. I see corporate actors coming in. I'm looking at you, Mark. Hello, other corporate players here. So really what happened 4 years ago is that we really were focused on how do you set sustainability commitments, how do you get not only corporates on track, but the world on track, and what are some interesting moments that were changing and shifting the dynamic of where we were at. So after 200 years of fossil fuel expansion, we're really at this turning point where the global energy system is transitioning. We can talk about, is it transitioning fast enough and at the speed and scale? I know what school we're in. Where we're at, yes, I don't think it is. But at the same time, what can we be doing to accelerate that? And the IEA is showing that there's more clean energy coming onto the system faster, it's getting cheaper, and the types of changes you want to see. You're also seeing ambition across the GDP. If you think about global GDP, that's captured in national government net zero targets and commitments. And you're looking at investment moving, $1.8 trillion. I was listening to a podcast recently that talked about the first trillion and how several years ago we couldn't imagine that first trillion going into climate tech and clean energy, and now we're at almost 2 trillion. And so I think there really is, when you look in the rear view, things do move and they do move quickly. When you look ahead at the mountain and it's growing, will it move fast enough? And these are really good questions to be asking ourselves. The other piece is corporate actors and the role that policy plays. The recently passed from last year, the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, it's a word that many of us in the corporate sector know well. It's an acronym we know really well. It's one where it's important because this directive out of Europe is not just a European-only directive. It's having reverberations across countries, across waters, everywhere, including recent news as of today with the Securities Exchange Commission finalizing their rule on climate disclosure. And under the European directive, around 50,000 companies are going to be required to disclose their sustainability, this work they're doing on sustainability. That's driving increased transparency, increased sunshine, and ideally increased motivation for greater action and speed. So then if we go on to, we think about Microsoft, and we really talked about, one of the things we're talking in the green room was, how do we think about this outsized impact, the global challenge that we're all facing, and what each of our roles are. I am relatively new to Microsoft. I joined about a year ago, and one thing that I'm learning in this journey of being in a company like Microsoft is the outsized impact companies play, and not just Microsoft, but other companies. So here's just a depiction that I really love about how I think about my role as a CSO and a role of a company like Microsoft. First and foremost, it starts at home. It is, earlier this year, Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, called climate change the defining issue of our generation. And meeting this generational challenge means putting sustainability at the center of the work that we do. And so that's really that centerpiece. It's how do we hit our goals to be carbon negative, water positive, a zero waste company that protects ecosystems, all by 2030, and by my clock, that is 6 years from now. And so what does it take to do that? And how do you build a team to get that done? And what are the types of skills you need to do that? The second key piece is customer sustainability. We also serve, hundreds and thousands of customers around the world with sustainable technologies, with tools, with different types of tech capabilities, digital enablement. How do we help them get on their sustainability journey? And we do that in a number of ways, not just the technology we provide, but also how do we connect with our peers? Between Peggy, myself, and others, we have CSO to CSO dialogues, but there's an opportunity for corporates to work together to create an outsized impact when we move together, and that's a key piece. This idea of corporate partnerships is continuing to become a bigger focus to how this effort is going to actually have a planetary-sized impact. And then lastly, global sustainability, which I'll spend more time today talking about. And the idea about global sustainability, of what all the tools companies have to create that outsized impact. For a company like Microsoft, it's things like our Climate Innovation Fund. It's the work that we're doing on investing in creating new markets for reaching some of these targets that we have here on this slide. It's the policy enablement we work with our policy and government affairs teams, and it's also the science and innovation that we're trying to catalyze with Microsoft Research and a bunch of other actors as well. So here's a quick snapshot of the targets that I mentioned, the goals that I mentioned. They're bold, they're ambitious. I think I was not there when we launched them, but it was back in 2020, and it was called at one point a carbon moonshot. And it truly was that. How we're gonna get there, the path wasn't known, but we've been slowly making progress on figuring out what is that path today to get to these goals and objectives. On the topic of carbon, to be carbon negative, we're not only going to be carbon negative by 2030 is our moonshot, but it's also by 2050 to remove all of the carbon in the atmosphere equivalent to the carbon we have put out as a company since our founding in 1975. On water, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. I got my start in the NGO sector at Natural Resources Defense Council, and it was at NRDC I focused a lot on water at the time. And today, 1 in 4 people live in countries facing water stress, and a number that's expected to increase to 1 in 3 by 2050. And so last year, Microsoft put out in writing so that it's clear exactly what is our 5-point pillars to a water positive strategy. It's to reduce water in operations, obviously, first and foremost. It's to replenish water to the key basins in which we draw water from. It's to invest in water innovation, invest in water policy, and 5th is to make sure we have access to, provide access to safe drinking water and sanitation for people. But we really want to create a robust definition to what is water positive and make it concrete. On zero waste, our path to becoming a zero waste company is increasingly around a circular economy, but it also goes into waste diversion across the value chain from design to material selection. And then we want to protect ecosystems. We're not a large landmass company, but it's really important that we want to keep biodiversity, ecosystems as a key part of our pillar to our work on sustainability. So I thought I would talk about a topic that I heard recently was not a big topic du jour of the moment today. So you can't have an event on sustainability or climate and feature tech companies if you don't talk about AI. So I'm pleased to be able to check off that bingo card for those that were playing bingo at this conference. So around the AI space, I thought I would just share to you a few areas in this topic in particular. We've seen a lot of changes in the technology sector, especially in the last year and a half, and it really helps us understand and ground how we get to our climate goals. And we really ask this question to ourselves around what are these new approaches that we're experimenting with, whether it's partnerships, the learning as we go, and what kind of shape does that take, and how do we share those learnings and insights with other people around the world, including in places like this. So the 3 areas that I'll focus on today, and we'll kind of go through those each in order. The first is around how AI solutions can create a greater impact. And I really would love for you all to think about this topic and how it might apply to the work you're thinking about doing, that you're doing today. I think this is a really interesting area around the way AI can be an accelerant to deploying existing sustainability solutions at scale, but also how we're investing in AI solutions to overcome key bottlenecks to sustainability progress. The second one is the acceleration of the development of these sustainability markets. In addition to that the Climate Innovation Fund I mentioned, the $1 billion fund, we're looking at other ways to invest in things like carbon removal, water replenishment, but really how do corporates create markets where frankly they hadn't existed before because they're vital to a sustainability challenge. And the third area is around how do you advance policy innovation and enable transformation along this journey. So first, on the AI as an accelerant to sustainability. We launched a playbook earlier last year, so I do encourage you to take a look at it. But it really is just a nice 101 guide of what are the superpowers of AI that can accelerate sustainability progress, and why do we believe it's a powerful tool for advancing sustainability. One of the key components and capabilities of AI is that it can intelligently analyze immense amounts of data that would take humans, frankly, months, years to do in the same amount of time. So this has the opportunity to turbocharge sustainability efforts. And we're talking about the climate crisis. We're really talking about a race against time to solve one of the biggest challenges out there. And it's not just science fiction. Oftentimes we think about AI. I was sitting if anyone saw Oppenheimer, one of the previews for Oppenheimer, I kid you not, it was on my holiday day, and I thought I'd go see a movie. This will be great, relax. And then trailer starts and it's like AI. And then it was like this really negative story about some future film coming, a summer blockbuster about AI being a bad thing. And I was like, well, this is not a relaxing day off. But I will say it's not science fiction. And that's why I took issue with the trailer that I saw. And the reason why it's not science fiction is because we're seeing AI today already having an impact towards advancing sustainability outcomes. And there are three key things about AI that we're using today that we can scale even faster. The first is that it can measure, predict, and optimize complex systems that are far too complex for traditional computational methods to handle. So these are things like forecasting extreme weather events, helping organizations improve their preparedness and resilience. The second area is how to accelerate the discovery and development of sustainable solutions. Things like low carbon materials, renewable energy production and storage, climate resilient crops. And the third key superpower or necessary tool of this technology is how it can empower a sustainability workforce by helping workers digest volumes of data needed for key decision makers to make decisions on sustainability information and be able to make better informed decisions. So I'll show you a little bit examples in each of these because I think that helps really ground that we're talking about the startup of an era of work for sustainability that we've only just started, it's only just begun. So here's one example, one that I love. Phytotechnologies, it's in the water space. Today, roughly one estimate says that around 30% of water is lost due to leaks in municipal water systems, and that's even higher in developing countries with worse infrastructure. This company called Phytotech, based in the UK, is deploying these AI bot sensors that it's acoustically enabled, and it can hear the sound of leaks because it attaches to a pipe, and water flowing through a pipe makes a certain sound. And when there's a leak in that pipe, that sound changes. And this bot can then ping a tablet device to say, oh, in this pipeline system, we see a notch in the sound that detects a leak. And then you can send out the Thames water system to go to that part of the sidewalk and dig it up and figure out like where exactly that leak is and repair it. And Microsoft's investing in this company and supporting it for our water replenishment goals. We're helping them address where the largest sources of leaks in that system, close those leaks, and you'll get a volumetric estimate about how much water has been saved or replenished by catching those leaks and going after the big leaks, also saving time and money for the municipal water system. The second example is Line Vision. This is a company also part of the Climate Innovation Fund ecosystem. This is a company that is helping decongest existing transmission lines. So again, you'll hear a lot about we need more clean energy grids, we need faster clean energy deployment, and frankly, we need more grids. We need more transmission, definitely. But we also need to better utilize existing transmission as we bring on more scale. And this is a company that's looking to decongest existing transmission lines. They've already deployed, and one of the examples I give you here is that when they deployed in UK's national grid system, they were able to increase capacity of the line by 60% and add an additional 600 megawatts of offshore wind capacity to that grid. The last example I'll give in this space is our partnership with the Pacific Northwest National Labs. This is the area where, as I was talking to somebody earlier, but many of us might have the COVID vaccine. And the miracle about the vaccine and the process to iterate that vaccine is it was the fastest ability for scientists to create a vaccine that helped move us out of a global pandemic. And the role of technology and AI and high compute power to create and iterate on a vaccine is well known to so many people that understand the rapid iteration to create a COVID vaccine. Now imagine that type of speed and scale applied into long duration battery storage into low carbon concrete. So here's a great example of where with PNNL and using the Azure Quantum Elements and other high compute power, the team looked at around 32 million, to the room of experts, 32.6 million to be exact, material candidates, and windowed that down into just a matter of weeks to come down to basically 18 types of materials, and then turned it into a prototype battery that will use around 70% less lithium. But to be able to do that type of narrowing down and winnowing down in a matter of weeks could not be possible without types of technologies like AI. So the next key piece, as I talked about for around AI, was around how does AI work to build the AI skills and sustainability workforce. This is like one that's near and dear to my heart, definitely near and dear to Peggy's heart. But the key part is how do you grow a sustainability workforce faster? There's a really interesting stat that we worked with LinkedIn on, and it says that today only 1 in 8 workers have a green skill. So congratulations to all of you. You are all part of that 1 in 8. How do we grow that number? And the key part is how do we use different types of skills training, AI skills training, to better target who needs these types of skills for sustainability and get them up to speed faster? Does everybody need to have a PhD in certain areas to be able to address these challenges? Potentially not, if we can get them skilled faster and use things like large language models and ways to just communicate easier, digest vast volumes of information. When I was in the climate conference in Dubai last year, we were sharing a preview of something called Environment GPT. And I was working with the United Nations Environment Program. They produced the seminal environmental reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, those big, very long documents that, as a lawyer, I like documents, but maybe that type of scientific weight is a lot. And so it's a training model that's trained on all of the UN-based scientific reports, and allows you to query that system with questions around climate change in Australia, climate change in South America, and it allows you to ask these questions of the compendium, all the world's best UN science, and give you natural language answers, all in the power of one prompt. And so that's just an example of how you can expedite scaling. You didn't have to study all those reports or go to courses for it forever. You could actually use the type of skills to help upskill a workforce and even faster. And at Microsoft, we're committed to doing this and bring AI skills into everyone's hands. And we're doing these things through LinkedIn Learning courses and AI skills initiatives and other things like that, but want to do far more of it. And I think it's a incredible opportunity we have before us. So the next area was around making markets. And how does corporates play a role in making markets? It sounds like there were 2 panels, workshops just before this. I sat in on one around the finance panel, but I assume the corporate panel also hit this. We have a massive opportunity before us to make markets and a massive need to create markets. One of the big ones, and I think you heard from Nan earlier today, is around carbon dioxide removal. This is an image of Heirloom, which is a carbon dioxide removal company, a CDR, I'm trying to not use acronyms, CDR company that we've invested in, and we've procured offtake of high durability carbon dioxide removal from them. And the Climate Innovation Fund is an announcement we made back in 2020. It's a $1 billion fund. We've allocated around $760 million to date into 56 funds and companies. And it's been an incredible resource to trial and test out this strategy called Invest to Procure, where we're investing in key markets and technologies, but also working to procure offtake from them at the same time. We've done this through the SIF portfolio, and I'll share some examples of what that looks like. But really, this is a great way to showcase the role of corporates as end consumers, but also early on investors to scale markets that are so needed to transform the sectors we need, not only as a company, but also as a planet. So a little closer look at this Invest to Procure strategy. So I'll ground everybody in why these scopes matter. So for Microsoft, we are a company that we disclose all of our emissions across all scopes. So scope 1 and 2 are direct emissions, directly from the buildings we operate or the energy we buy. Scope 3 is the embodied carbon of the things in our indirect procurement line. Think supply chains, value chains. Why we put scope 3 first is because that represents 96% of Microsoft's entire carbon footprint. And the remaining 4% is in scopes 1 and 2, after we work on renewables. So what can we do in scope 3? Scope 3 is everybody's problem. It is everyone's challenge. It's, I think, the latest stat I heard from a consultancy. For every company, it's at least 70% of their footprints coming from scope 3. Scope 3 is a global challenge. It's an everybody challenge. I think the phrase is someone's Scope 3 is someone else's Scope 1 or 2. And so we have to tackle this, and it's great that we disclose this. But how do we do this? How do you influence the indirect procurement side? This is where Invest to Procure comes in. So we're looking at the embodied carbon of things that we need for our data centers: concrete, steel. We need semiconductor chips. We need carbon dioxide removal to remove the rest of our emissions that we cannot reduce in Scope 3. That's what our commitment is. And we need it for sustainable aviation fuel. And so the Climate Innovation Fund has been a great opportunity for us to invest in many of these young companies, some of them coming out of Stanford, and be able to take off of them as well, so that they can continue to raise rounds and scale as a company. Another key part to the strategy is, how does this look like in practice? So I'll give you a couple examples. One, sustainable aviation fuel. Earlier last year, we signed a 10-year contract with a company called World Energy to take sustainable aviation fuel certificates, and that would be aiming to replace over 40 million gallons or so of fossil jet fuel. And this was really funded between International Airlines Group and ourselves. We also participate in other partnerships with other airlines. One example would be the partnership we did with a young startup called 12, making renewable, called E-Jet, a jet fuel made out of air, using captured carbon dioxide. And we partnered with Alaska Airlines, who will fly the E-Jet, and we will work with them on the credits around the SAF fuel that's flown. We also, as I mentioned, it's not just about carbon. It's about water, and it's about waste, and it's about biodiversity and ecosystems. I'll give one example about the water component. We really need markets for water replenishment, and this is like my clarion call for those that are interested in working in the water space. Please do. We need more. Just like you need a carbon dioxide removal market and we need a market for carbon, we also need a market for water replenishment. It's so vital. It's so vital to find opportunities to invest in these critical solutions that are required to help invest and replenish water back to the areas that they're withdrawn from. And there's great opportunities for it, whether it's the phytotechnologies or working with different types of crop technologies, irrigation systems with farmers. There's so many different ways you can do this, but the team that I get to work with every day that's doing it are doing a lot of first-of-its-kind projects and thinking through what are ways to get it done. So I think there's an incredible opportunity to do more in this space, and a lot more brain power that could be used to devote to this area. So moving on to our own footprint component is how we're thinking about design opportunities and ways to take into account our own footprint. It's really how we think about our data centers and what we're doing to innovate in design and operations of our data center, not only to conserve power, but also to reduce water, as well as to reduce emissions. We're looking to scale our procurement of clean energy in this space. The way we procured more water, we're procuring more water replenishment and more carbon dioxide removal. We're also looking to do this in the renewable energy space so that we can meet our goal of matching all of our electricity consumption with 100% renewables by 2025. And that is leading us to be one of the largest corporate purchasers of renewable power on the market today as well. And I want to talk a little bit about policy, because I think what was interesting about today's agenda, let's see if I get this here. Did I do it? I did. The thing about policy I think has been really unique is you've heard from some policy people. As Peggy mentioned, I spent some time in government working for both John Kerry and Joe Biden. And the incredible role that policy plays in scaling markets, advancing innovation, getting tech to market, not just the United States, but around the world, is so vital. I mean, there's a lot of companies that ask, I've got one extra headcount left. Do I spend it on a BD person or do I spend it on policy? How do I navigate this space? And I think looking at ways to be creative about how do you skill yourself on policy, how do you work with partners in policy, how you look at policy on your cap table, and how you think about policy generally affecting your business is so vital to its growth. It can be a headwind or it could be a tailwind. When I was in private equity, we looked at only investing in places where policy was a tailwind, but we came across many areas where it was a headwind. Policy conditions matter, policy advocacy matters, and this is why we have a core team within my own group focused around policy advocacy, around market adoption of things such as carbon dioxide removal, around innovative water policies, around ways to scale supply and demand in carbon, and also looking at ways to focus on corporate disclosures. Examples in this space are as well, where do policies show up in terms of advancing carbon-free power sources? Earlier last year, we took a position on nuclear power, both small modular reactors and fusion power technologies as well. But there's an incredible opportunity here to merge both an investment theme with a policy theme, and you're starting to see that more and more, both in our Climate Innovation Fund and the portfolios we get to work with, but also in the way corporates are showing up and demonstrating the role that policy plays in accelerating progress into this market. The last piece that I get really excited about, and I'm so glad that I was in the green room asking what are some of the key takeaways from this conference, because the slide was already in here, was the important role of sustainability jobs, sustainability people, but sustainability skills, and what does that look like? And it really is a broad range of talent and skill sets. It's not just policy people. You know, my background is policy, finance, tech, advocacy, and I think that is what the new world looks like around sustainability. It is truly a multidisciplinary space. It cannot just be one. And the reason why is we all speak different languages. I've sat in policy rooms, I've sat in investing rooms, and it's everything from the way we define a word like finance. In some places they call it finance, and other places they call it finance, and it's not a British accent. And so I think, you hear that, I will say that is one of the first things that I'll tell you, did you get an MBA or did you get a policy degree? And I think it's as simple as that. It's linguistics that we use of how we actually communicate with one another, and having the ability to be in different rooms and learn different languages is what's it going to take to actually accelerate progress. You can't just have policy people sitting in a room. They're not going to solve it alone. But you also can't have the corporate sector sitting in a room because we can't solve it alone. A company like Microsoft is a large company by market cap, but our emissions is about, 0.03% of global emissions is a single company. We need to have partners. We need to do it at scale with others, and we can't do it alone. And what that means is we need startups, entrepreneurs, we need investors, we need policymakers, we need scientists, we need advocates, all coming to the table, speaking their own language, and being able to figure out what we can do together to actually move the needle forward to really accelerate the progress we need to tackle major challenges, especially the challenge of the climate crisis. I'm incredibly optimistic that there are people out here today and people out there everywhere that have these unique skills and are looking to find ways to dedicate it to advancing sustainability. We're getting more creative across policy, finance, and tech, and we got to keep doing that even more so at a scale. I was pleased to see a LinkedIn post earlier today or 2 days ago that highlighted 400 Stanford GSB alumni that are entrepreneurs, investors, nonprofit, and corporate leaders doing incredible work on climate change, and that's just from GSB. And you take that at a broader scale, and it's incredible to see all the range of it. And the way that post was written, it had all the different categories from solar to finance. And again, that diversity of skill set, as you start to watch those names move between sectors, that to me is the unlock that's really going to move us to the scale we need by 2030 and then by 2050. So what this looks like is we need more green innovators, more entrepreneurs, continue to bring the best thinking to the market to power even more change. We're starting to see a mobilization of a growing number of green entrepreneurs powering the startup engines out there for innovation to bring these new technologies to scale in multiple sectors and to make progress out of global change. But we need more of it. And so I was just so pleased to accept the invitation to come speak with all of you today and hopefully share some of these insights. And I would love to open it up for questions with that, hopefully enough fodder for discussion. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One is about the policy advocacy, and I'm curious, what specifically Microsoft advocates when it comes to carbon dioxide removal, and does it involve carbon pricing at all? Microsoft has a standpoint or a viewpoint on that. And then the second question is about the idea of trade-offs, and this is something that we discussed in the corporate panel a little bit, and there was one example brought up about trade-off between energy and water efficiency in data centers. And I'm just curious to get your idea because your presentation was very positive, optimistic. It talked a lot about the opportunities, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on what are some of the biggest trade-offs that companies do have to consider when they're advancing so many ambitious sustainability goals all at once.
So on CDR, great question. We do advocate for CDR policy, and we've actually produced 3 white papers on CDR in particular that goes through not only what we've learned in the last 3 years and actually we are the largest corporate purchaser of, if you're asking the question, you probably know that we are the largest corporate purchaser of CDR, and that's coupled with a policy component because we want to make sure that the policy and regulatory environment knows what is CDR, what's high durability, what's high integrity, how they should think about MRV in this space, because it is what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said is needed by 2050. There will need to be the ability to withdraw carbon out of the atmosphere, but how do you make sure that the market is a ripe market to actually go do that? And we are out there in front trying to make it happen, but it has to go with an inform and a partnership with policymakers to make that happen. And so we have, I don't know if we put out the policy paper on CDR, but you'll see policy elements in our existing 3 white papers on CDR. In terms of the trade-offs, I will admit, I've spent over probably a decade working with the Special Presidential Envoy on Climate Change, John Kerry. If anyone's met him, he is an optimist. That man is an incredible leader and an optimist when it comes to climate change. It's infectious. So I will say that's my bias. I'm an optimist. But is it hard? Absolutely. Are these incredible challenges? Absolutely. When it comes to trade-offs that need to happen, these are things where you can look at, I think what you're probably talking about is low water technologies require more energy, right? And then on the other side, this also leads itself to siting. So can you also think about siting of data centers where you don't have to make that trade-off, where if you need, you could do a low water solution in an area where there's abundant clean energy, and you're not building them in just hot desert areas. You can think about siting. And I think you'll see this more and more from other large corporates is how they think about siting in these conversations around trade-offs. You're also looking at new types of technologies and chips that are out there that have a different water usage necessity to it. You're also looking at different types of energy opportunities to fill a carbon-free energy resource. So that's why, frankly, we had a paper out last year talking about what is Microsoft's position around carbon-free energy resources and firm power such as nuclear, advanced reactors, and fusion to help people understand, look, when we talk about adding net new power to the grid that's carbon-free, we're not just talking about solar and wind, we're also expanding the pie of that definition to include larger sources of power like this so that we can not have to make all the trade-offs in each of these spaces.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here.
You have notes.
I'm an MBA 1 here, and my question for you was, Microsoft has really ambitious renewable targets. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit from the buyer side of where you see the biggest technology gaps in terms of being able to hit those targets, whether it be 24/7 renewable energy or waste or water.
Great. So I would say on the renewable energy side, there's two things we're focused on. One is, on the buying side, is, because you asked what the challenges are. I would say one is the supply in the market, making sure we have the access to the supply. I think the other key piece is an opportunity set is around long duration battery storage. That's going to be a key part to how we think about this. And the third is transmission, which is not even our, it's an area that is fundamental to how we're going to get more clean power in the systems, but it's on transmission. And so I feel like I'm going to be like Oprah, like there's an app for that. But there's a white paper on this, and I'm going to say that a lot. We write a lot of white papers. But when I joined the company, I read a lot of these white papers because I was new to the company. And one of the ones was on electricity policy and energy policy, where it focused a lot on transmission. And I think the thing that struck me has been when we show up to places, and earlier last year we convened the Asia Pacific Energy Economic Council, APEC. We convened the APEC energy ministers in Seattle. They were there because the US government was hosting APEC. And we did a power sector decarbonization panel with these Asian countries, these Asian economies. And we talked about energy transmission with them. And they're like, oh, what, as a tech company, why are we having this conversation on transmission? Do you have a tech for that? And we said, no, it's really important that we get clean energy grids moving faster around the world, not just for our own data center use or operations, but I need our chip manufacturers to have access to the clean power. I need our cement and steel companies to have access to that. But our entire supply chain, as I mentioned, the 96% of our Scope 3 emissions, they need that. And so a clean energy transmission grid is really fundamental to that. And that's why I gave the line vision example, because there are technologies today that help decongest existing grids, but we also need net new.
Thanks. Progress is never linear. There's a dialectic process. And right now we're kind of in a little bit of a backlash against ESG. And some companies have pared down their commitments. Even some financial institutions who made big announcements to decarbonization and climate tech are paring those down or not materializing. How do you see this playing out in the next 5 years, especially if the White House leadership changes and so on? So what do you see the options are, and how can we keep on pushing this agenda forward, even if it's up and down? And I suppose part of what Microsoft is going to do is give Brandon a second fund for decarbonization and stuff. We know her because she's a GSP grant. So tell us about how you see this panning out.
Progress is not linear, I think, was the headline to one of our reports. I think it's a great question. So I would say two things. One is, because this is a room of experts, and I just would love to make sure you're out there sharing this as well. Just because a company is not talking about the work they're doing doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing it. And so I was in Davos earlier this year and at the World Economic Forum, and someone mentioned this word to me called green hushing. And I was like, what's that? I know what greenwashing is, and what's green hushing? And so when companies are starting to not talk about what they're doing or they're paring it back. And it's been this interesting discussion where there's some conflation where companies aren't talking about what they're doing, and then the media covers it as they're paring it back because they're not talking about it. But as I mentioned, I meet with my peers all the time, and it's so interesting to see my peers are continuing to move progress forward within their own companies. They're still putting money to work, they're investing, they're making the hard decisions inside. They might just not be talking about it. And so that can appear as a paring back. And so I'd love for all of us to just, when we think about it, to see, is it actually a step backwards, or is it more of a silence? Because and believe me, there's a challenge around green hushing. This is a real concern. But I think it's an area where part of the paring back might just be the lack of talking about it as much. And the reason why some of us aren't talking about it as much is because this is the implementation phase. This is not the proclamation, grip and grin, sign new pledges, commit to new commitments. That moment, I think, is a little bit past us. We are now all in the implementation mode. We made the big, bold commitments. Now it's the brass tack. Let's get to work. And as I've been told by our comms team, you don't do press releases on, the fact that, like, we got this thing done towards our commitment. It's like, no, you just got to keep talking about where we're landing towards it. So I think that's one area. The other question you raised, though, is a real question, which is around the general ESG backlash that you're seeing out there. Some will argue it's a very US-centric moment because you see what's happening in Europe with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. 50,000 companies are going to be reporting on ESG metrics. And there's continued pressure, particularly in Europe, to keep doing this. You're seeing this also spring up in other parts of the world as well. And so on this component, I would say for a company like Microsoft, we fundamentally believe that sustainability and ESG issues are core to our success. It's where we have key parts of our business are based around this, and we continue to talk about it. And that's our contribution to the space, is we continue to be an advocate for it and to be outspoken about the work we're doing in this space. The last piece around election cycles, one of the largest movements of corporate activity around sustainability was in 2020. And it's an important date if you think about it. Who was in the US office at the time, I think is noteworthy. I think that sometimes the political shifts, it also can accelerate action. It can accelerate the voices that are taking leadership roles and that are moving forward with progress. I left the Obama administration, and I went to private equity, where I got to work alongside private investors deploying more first-time capital into climate tech and climate solutions to ride that 2017 to 2020 wave of climate tech when it became not clean tech 3.0, but actually its own pitch book searchable term, which is the indication of success. So I just think that there are moments where there's the hype around some of the tumult that can happen. But when you look backwards, there's some incredible successes that happen during these moments where people lean in and become vocal advocates.
Hi, my name is Deepti. I have a question related to AI, and you mentioned that a couple of times. As we all know, powering AI requires incredible amounts of energy and also incredible amounts of water to actually cool down the data centers, right? And I know you touched upon it, but there was a recent article in The Atlantic about the Microsoft Goodyear facility where OpenAI is really expanding the cloud computing and AI efforts, and that's like guzzling the waters in Arizona. And I was just wondering if you have a perspective on that, because on one hand, we have the need to power AI and do all that great work and support sustainability through AI, but it also has an impact on the region where these data centers are. So I was wondering if you have any role in influencing your internal colleagues and also your peers that are leading sustainability in other companies that are in this AI race on how you can manage the need for growth and also environmental responsibility. It's just, I know it's a tough question, but I just felt like with all the news around it, I felt like it would be great to get your perspective on it.
Of course, and I have a slide. So this was the playbook that I mentioned earlier, and I just want to use it to ground my responses in this space. I love the frame of the question because, again, this is a room of experts who understand the space. It's a local issue, right? And I think that's like, I think that's exactly the piece to talk about is what is the impact of technology at a local issue, at the locality, and what are we doing about the local component? Because I think this room understands that it's not the global challenge, it's a local challenge. This is just at least the 5-point playbook, and I share it because this is a way we think about AI's opportunity set and challenge set. So on the challenge set, we have to minimize, first and foremost, the resource use in operations, whether it's fossil-based energy, so I want to be clear, it's got to be the fossil-based energy, or it's the water consumption piece. And this is looking at new chip technologies that are lower water consuming. The thing about tech in general, and there's a stat that's out there about data center efficiency, right? We were able to grow from like 2010 to 2020. I don't know if this is on the record or if there's press in the room. There probably are. So if I'm going to say a stat, but I don't know if the stat's right. So don't take the stat to heart. But it's like 2010 to 2020, we grew data center capacity by, I don't know, compute power tenfold, but energy only went up 1%. I think that, we could Bing it to figure out what the answer to that question is. Okay, thank you guys. One day it won't be a joke. But the idea is that you have the existing data center fleet, but the idea is that these data center fleets will continue to improve from a resource consumption going forward, and we have to be focused on that, and we are. Our peers are. I've seen my peers' blogs in this space, but looking at low water consumption chips or looking at low water technologies, and then citing to this gentleman's question where the energy can be carbon free, and that's why looking at what is that. So you get the answer to both carbon free and water. It's also about the net new power. I think it's really important to index on bringing net new power to these systems as well to address the local concerns about the energy component of the facilities themselves. So that's first and foremost from the locality, and it's community engagement, community programs, so we could tackle it there. I also want us to step back a few feet to also look at the other components of what AI can do from a global sustainability perspective, because we have to address the near-term components of it, but we also have to recognize that the global scale opportunity set that comes from it that we're already seeing today in practice can fundamentally transform our sustainability progress in a positive way. And so to balance both of those ideas, that's been, I was talking to a team last week about the toughest job about a sustainability leader today, many leaders today, is that you have to hold two truths in one hand. You have to hold the incredible progress you've made and pat yourself on the back a little bit for it, but also look at the giant mountain that keeps growing and not be too overwhelmed and daunted by it. And so I think that's also this piece around the AI component, is to think about both of those. And that's how myself, my peers, I'm sure, are all thinking about it from this component.
Microsoft is clearly a leader in the sustainability space, as is Google and LinkedIn and other companies that we have here, that we're seeing concentration in the tech world that has high margins and a relatively easier to abate industry. So I guess if you were dropped into a company or an industry that doesn't have that has thinner margins, harder to abate emissions, in the absence of regulatory sticks and carrots, how would you kind of convince executives to kind of get that corporate mandate?
Pick your sector. What are you thinking? I'm making multiple choice. Are you thinking like steel, cement, or are you thinking?
Okay, let's do mining.
Mining. Okay. I'm sorry, I am an optimist, so I will say that. And I get to meet, and the problem is I get to meet with my peers in many of these companies. I'm thinking of the mining companies I've met with. On the mining side, I think about hydrogen. I think about hydrogen trucking at scale in the mining sector. I think about the regulatory environment that can actually incentivize the mining sector to transition to cap methane in some of the mining components. If you think about oil and gas, and then in the mining sector you have components there. There's a mining company I can think of in particular that's one of the leading companies in the hydrogen revolution. They're investing heavily into that right now as we speak, because they see a whole business model around that in their space. They also see it as, because they have all these trucks, they can actually convert those fleets at scale in a way that other sectors can't, and then bring the cost down for the overall sector. The other space in mining that I see is a lot of mining companies are becoming advocates for circularity because it is getting harder to mine some of these materials. And so what they were trying to do is actually be an advocate for circularity. So as a company that makes hardware devices, such as the Surface Pro, and if I was a salesperson, I'd rattle off all the other SKUs, but I don't know all the SKUs. That's also been a key component, is how do we as purchasers of those materials, small scale, make choices that are informed by what the carbon content is of each of those devices. I think for large companies like mining or cement or steel, they're facing two pressures. One is the regulatory world's going to force them to disclose their data. And that data then feeds into their buyers who have to disclose that data. And those buyers like us have made corporate commitments to reduce our embodied carbon. So now we're going to have a very interesting, transparent conversation with our supply chain to say, mining company X, mining company Y. This one is actually slightly lower carbon because they made some investments like in hydrogen trucking or something else, and this one hasn't. And holding all things constant, we're going to go with this person. And so you have that pressure of both having to be forced to disclose this information. You're having your suppliers now know more information about being able to compare apples to apples with each other, as well as you have the new technologies that are coming on cheaper and at scale, or being able to pilot it. Some of the companies I've talked to, young startups, will do 1 or 2 pilots with a large mining company because it's not that expensive for a large mining company to do a pilot and showcase it is possible. And then you have companies like myself that have an invest to procure strategy. So we will invest in that green premium to get the green attributes of that product or to support the green attributes product that normally would not have been funded for. But corporate actors that have taken these ambitious commitments, which is why it's important that they have these commitments, because it helps close that gap to say, okay, your margins are really tight. You can't afford to do that. But if we can actually pay for that green premium to make your product on renewable energy, on a lower carbon fuel, if we can pay for that and we get those attributes for it, you then can actually deploy it. And over time, ideally, cost goes down and it becomes an easier switch for them. But that's why the hard to abate, which I call the need to abate sector, I just don't think it is incredibly hard. Interest rates going up make it hard. But I do think there are solutions and tools out there that is this marriage of corporate and policy and the tech that's there that is the secret sauce to get it to happen. And now it's the scaling of that that's really vital.